Well, the big issue last week was definitely the meeting of the G20 finance ministers in Sydney, hosted by Treasurer Joe Hockey. This week, parliamentary question time is clearly going to be dominated by the fallout from the Manus Island riot, which also happened last week. To discuss these twin issues, I'm joined now from the nation's capital by Labor's Stephen Jones and Kelly O'Dwyer, representing the Liberal Party. Thanks very much for being there, both of you. Let me go to you first, Kelly O'Dwyer. If this inquiry that Scott Morrison is talking about is going to investigate him, does it need to be an independent inquiry, or is it just otherwise known as irrelevant, the fact that he's investigating himself?
It is an independent inquiry, and obviously the inquiry will look at all of the facts. It's not going to be a rushed inquiry. It will go through in some detail exactly what occurred at Manus Island on the night of those violent disruptions. And I think all Australians would like to understand exactly what's occurred. I think the Minister's done an incredibly good job.
There's independent and then there's independent. How independent is this? I mean, are the terms of reference being set by the Minister, for example? Is the inquiry being overseen by the Minister's department? It's obviously not a royal commission, I'm not calling for that, but how independent is it?
Well, it will obviously be independent. It will look at what has occurred on the date, the relevant date, and will interview the relevant people, and it will bring forward all of the facts. And can I just make this point, Peter? I think that the Minister has actually done a very good job at trying to bring all of the facts to the fore at the relevant times based on the information that's been available to him. And I know that he has been criticised very heavily by the Labor Party and the Greens for doing this, yet this is exactly the thing that they asked him to do, and I think he has been doing this job in very difficult circumstances very well.
Stephen Jones, it's hard to escape the fact that the problems at Manus Island are because it is overcrowded, and it is overcrowded because your side of politics was unable to stop the boats.
No, look, it's overcrowded because they haven't been processing. We know there is a massive backlog. They've virtually stopped processing people on Manus Island since the government came to office. But can I go to the question you put squarely to Kelly? There is one test of whether the inquiry will be independent, and that is, will it also inquire into what the Minister knew and when, and the directions that the Minister gave, and how they are related to what's gone on at Manus Island as well? That's the real test of whether it's an independent inquiry.
That might be the case, but Stephen Jones, from your perspective, does Labor take some responsibility here? I mean, at the end of the day, slow processing or not, even if we accept that premise, the numbers have swelled and are what they are there in no small part because of the number of boat flows during your time in government.
Now, we take responsibility for putting in place the Pacific Agreement with PNG and elsewhere. I think it's been a critical part of the overall strategy. There is no one silver bullet, and we said that at the time. The reason that there is mounting frustration on Manus Island is that people have got no idea what their future is.
Well, the biggest reason, though, surely, Mr. Jones, the reason that there's such disdain on the island is because they're stuck in PNG, and they're stuck there, as you say, because it was your policy.
Now, look, we don't take a step back from the fact that we need to send a clear message to people that if they're coming by irregular methods, then they're not going to get to Australia. We will give preference to people in refugee camps around the world over people who seek to come here by boat or other means. That is the clear message. Look, the reason that there is a backlog in Manus Island is because the government's basically been doing a go slow on processing. That is the reason. That is the single biggest problem. Yes, there's overcrowding there, and the government on its watch needs to ensure that the facilities are fit for purpose.
Kelly O'Dwyer, what's your response to that idea of a go slow in processing?
Well, I just find it extraordinary that Stephen is actually suggesting with a straight face that somehow the government is responsible for the volume of numbers of people who have arrived unauthorised on Australian soil. I mean, we saw under their watch with the dismantling of the border protection scheme that we had in place, more than 50,000 people arrive in Australia. We have seen now, since Operation Sovereign Borders has been in place, not one arrival on Australian soil in more than 65 days, 65 consecutive days. And at the same time, in that same period, only only a year ago we saw more than 1,500 people arrive. So I think it's very clear that the policy that we have put in place is actually working. There will, of course,
what about processing though, Kelly O'Dwyer? What about processing? Because look, your side of politics appears to have stopped the boats. Labor can say all they want about them bringing the PNG solution into effect. It has been on your government's watch that the boats have stopped. That said, though, is slow processing part of that? Is that a strategy, or is that just because it's complicated when people, I don't know, throw away passports?
It's a Labor Party soundbite. That's what it is, and it's simply not correct to say that there's. It's simply not correct to say that people are not being processed in a fair and efficient manner. It is incumbent upon us to do that. That is what we're doing, and it's simply another one of these Labor Party soundbites.
All right, let's move on to the G20.
Far from being a soundbite, it's true, and it's exactly the same test that the former opposition gave to us when we were in government. We don't think it's unreasonable that we hold them to the same standard.
All right, let's move on to the G20 finance ministers meeting in Sydney. Stephen Jones, from Labor's perspective, do you acknowledge that this was a win? This week was a win for Joe Hockey. He's going to have to follow it up. That's going to be tough. But ultimately, he has got, it's like herding cats amongst G20 finance ministers. He's got them all on the same page for a growth target. That's something that Labor welcomes, surely.
Look, it's a win for Australia, just as it was a win for Australia when, under our watch, we secured the leadership of the G20, and Joe Hockey has inherited that. I will say this, though. Look, we welcome the moves by the G20 leaders to look at reform of their economies and to accelerate the trade agreements around the world. But one of the areas where we do think that Joe Hockey has squibbed it is on the area of international tax evasion. Talked a big game before the G20, basically dropped it when the going went too tough. Why do you think he dropped it? Look, obviously he thought the going was too tough. I mean, this is an issue that means a lot to us in Australia. If we're bleeding revenues and other G20 companies are bleeding revenues because frankly unethical tax evasion by the largest companies in the world, we need to do something about it. There was an opportunity to get an agreement and Joe Hockey squibbed it.
Kelly O'Dwyer, your response to that? You're the chair of the House Economics Committee. Is that a fair comment by Stephen Jones?
It's not a fair comment at all. In fact, it's a complete misrepresentation about what occurred at the G20 with the finance ministers and central bank governors. In fact, we did in fact put in place an agreement to share tax information automatically between jurisdictions. That's a great win. That's a great win not only for Australia but for the world. So it's simply not correct to say that we're going soft. Far from it. We are proceeding further on this issue than people had expected, and I think it's a great win that we were able to secure that agreement. But can I also say this about the G20? I mean, we saw great leadership by Joe Hockey at this particular meeting. It was an action-orientated agenda. Let's not forget that the people in the room represent around 85% of the world's economy and around 75% of global trade.
All right. This isn't an infotainment. This isn't an infotainment for Joe Hockey's talk fest at the G20. I don't have any time for any international agreements. They're all rubbish. It should be free for all out there. But a quick question I want to pose to you to start with, Kelly O'Dwyer. It looks to me like there is a bit of a rift inside the Liberal Party in government between the economic drives, which I'd probably put you in, as well as, I guess the others who don't really know what they stand for economically. It seems to me that, the Peter Duttons of this world and the Joe Hockeys even are really pushing hard on some things like Medicare with co-payments and so on. Yet on the other side, there are those, particularly in Cabinet, that have a bit of an issue with that. We saw someone like Scott Morrison on SPC squib it. Is there a rift there? Is this the big debate for the Liberal Party in the year ahead?
Well, I obviously can't comment on what goes on in Cabinet because I'm not in Cabinet. But what I can say to you is
and
that
more shame to that, but
coalition, I'm not going to enter into that. But the entire coalition party is entirely at one with the idea that we need to be able to live within our means and take the measures that are necessary in order to do that. Now, that's going to require significant structural reform. We've been given a mandate from the people in order to do that. We've got a commission in audit in place making recommendations, and in the budget, Joe Hockey will make the decisions that need to be made in order to be fiscally responsible.
All right, let me jump in. Stephen Jones, just quickly before we go, will Labor back any of these fiscally responsible necessary steps?
Well, we won't be backing the GP tax, and I don't recall at any time during the election or before the coalition saying we're going to introduce a K payment for Medicare. Look, the truth is this, Peter. Joe Hockey's launched a war on entitlements. He's trying to tell people that it's about somebody else's entitlements, somebody else's services. The fact is it's going to affect every Australian. We'll know a bit more about this in a few weeks' time when the Commission of Audit hands down its recommendations.
But don't stop the Labor scare campaign.
It's a smokescreen for cuts to benefits and services.
All right, we have to leave it there. You two can continue fighting off screen. Stephen Jones representing Labor, Kelly O'Dwyer for the Liberal Party. We appreciate you both of you joining me for PVO News Hour. Thanks very much.
Good to be with you.